Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening, depending upon which part of the world you're actually in, as I'm aware that we've got quite an international group joining our session today. So thank you very much on behalf of Comet for everyone joining and taking your time out from no doubt busy schedules. This is another one in our series of expert series around Comet. For those of you who are not familiar with Comet, we are based in the UK. We're an organization who is predominantly involved in providing software and services for risk management, incident investigation. So looking at risk, past risk through incident investigation, present risk through incident management, risk management, and also looking at future risk through using intelligence and data to get insights. And that's predominantly what the theme around today's webinar is about. My name is Douglas Leith. I'm Chief Intelligence Officer with Comet. And although I have an engineering background, I've always had a sort of passion as a frustrated creative in that whenever I see data and whenever I see complex things, I always have an urge to make them much more clearer and to bring clarity. In fact, I have a motto of complexity to clarity. So what we want to do during this session is I want to share with you a few things. One is a bit of a structure around everyone's gathering data, so a bit of structure around how we can better improve what we do with the data that we gather, how we can better gather it, how we can better share it, how we can better derive insights from it. And we'll use our Comet environment as some examples of that. Although I'll also use some examples from some other related systems as well to make a few points. And also what I want to share with you is I have a set of design principles that I apply whenever we look at trying to improve the way in which data is used. And I'll share with you some of them and show you some examples of what we mean by that. So really what I'm hoping that you can take away from this is you can take away some actions that that you could do to go and improve how you gather your data, how you derive information from it, and how you make better decisions in using it. So that's my aim over the next 40 minutes or so. What I intend to do is I'll run through some examples here and as I say, share with you some ideas and themes. And then we'll have some time at the end for kind of more open questions if anyone wants to ask that. However, along the way, there's a chat box on the side of the screen here. If anyone does want to ask a question, share some experience, completely disagree with me, that's fine. Just please, as we're going along, just type something in the chat box and we'll pick that up and can address that as need be. So, yeah, data insights, getting some more from the data that you have. So what we want to do is I first of all want to just be clear about what we mean by the difference between data and information and intelligence, because to me these three things are linked and they grow from the data that you gather. So I want to just take a couple of very left field examples and make sure that we understand and agree what we mean by these particular terms. And then what I want to do is look at how we can assess data quality. So we're all gathering data, we're gathering ever more amounts of it. It's becoming easier to gather, but that doesn't mean to say we're gathering it any better. So I'll take a look at some ways in which we can sense check whether what we're gathering is actually of any use or not. And then we'll talk about information quality. So when we're actually trying to consume this, how good are we actually at delivering information from the data that we've got? And again, as I say, I'll share with you some principles and some views on that. And then finally, we'll wrap things up by sort of looking ahead. And so we'll ultimately, all of this is about trying to make better decisions. So how does having the right data in the right format give us some intelligence and allow us to manage to make decisions? So as I say, along the way, I'll use some examples from the Comet platform. Many of you on here today are Comet users, and you'll be familiar with some of the data that's in there. For those of you who are not, the Comet Root App tool has a wide range of functionality around gathering information about incidents which have occurred, about audits and assurance which have been done, and also looking at diverse data sources in order to try and look at predictions about the future as well. So think about it as a system that's very much looking at risk in high risk environments. So many of our COMET users are working in high risk environments in energy industry, utilities industries, construction industries, transportation, etc. Wherever there's an opportunity for high risk. So let's get into this. So first part is about just, as I say, making definitions around what we mean by data and information and intelligence. And I'm going to pick two completely, well, I was going to say unrelated examples, but quite historical examples in many ways to try and demonstrate a point here and get a difference between what these things actually are. Some of these, well, one in particular, the second one is probably quite widely known. But I want to share with you a couple examples about people using data to try to provide information to influence decision making. And this first one I've got up here is from a court case back in the 1980s. And it was a court case in New York, and it involved the state prosecuting what was someone who was alleged to be a mafia mobster, to want of a better phrase. The defense, the prosecution used a number of witnesses who were basically government informants. And what the prosecution, so what the defense tried to do was to basically paint these informants as being completely unreliable individuals that the jury should pay no attention to whatsoever. And one of the things the defense did was produce this little table and showed it to the jury. And this little table of data, each of the columns was one of the government informants who gave evidence at the trial of this alleged mafia mobster. Their names at the top. And each row on this table was a felony, was a crime that they had been convicted of at some point in their lives. So they've gathered all this data, a list of crimes, columns of witnesses, and they've put an X where that witness has actually been recorded as having been convicted of that crime. The idea was to try and convince the jury that they should completely disregard the information from the informants, from the witnesses. Now, there's a few things about this about this document, and you've probably looked at it there on screen and had a quick glance at it. When you did have a glance at it, how did you look at it? What was your take on this? What can you conclude from taking a look at this particular document here? If you were sitting in the jury at this point in time, what would you conclude? Because the way in which this table has been put together is just one of many principles around how people consume information. So just having the data, they're not very nice people, says Grant. So we've got a comment there from Grant that says they're not very nice people. Right. So as a jury now, we're coming to the conclusion that these are not nice people. So yeah, the defense put all the data together. Very questionable informants, Thomas says. They got the data. They could have presented this to the jury in many different ways. But one of the things they've done here is they've presented it as a single field of view. We don't want you to go through reams of paperwork. We don't want you to sit and listen to someone forever. Here it is. Here's the data in one field of view. The second thing they've done is they've made it, when people come to look at lists, and this is a scientific proven fact, and you maybe did this yourself just now when you looked at this, when people look at long lists, what they will do is they will look at the top 2 or 3, and then they'll look at the bottom 2 or 3. And then they'll maybe start to look at the stuff in the middle. Yeah. So there's a thing there about how people consume information, and understanding how people consume information is important. And what they've done here is they've put the worst crimes at the top of the table and at the bottom of the table. So we can look there and see that Cardinale not only is a murderer, but he once pistol whipped a priest. Now, he's the only one to have ever done that, but that sticks in your mind because you notice that. All right. So there's a thing there about how people consume information. It's not just enough to gather data and give it to people. It's very much about how we present this. Someone else makes a point as well about it being very, very black and white. So we're not getting interference here with colors and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very plainly presented. So that's one example about data, information, intelligence, and I'll come back and just summarize what you think about that. The other one is quite a controversial one and a very emotive one and a historical one. This is one from the late 18th century, and some of you may well be aware of this diagram that was produced way back in the late 1700s. It was commissioned by slavery abolitionists at the time, and it's a technical drawing of the Brooks slave ship that was used, sailed from Liverpool. And they commissioned this drawing to show how basically the cargo, for want of a better phrase, was loaded on these ships and transported. And it's an interesting juxtaposition of how they've taken a very technical engineering approach to production of the drawings of these ships, and then produced this very human approach on top of it. So it shows how the people were transported across the oceans in the late 1800s. And this diagram and variations of it became, to use a 21st century phrase, viral, and was a huge factor in the abolition of slavery movement. So it's about how we present information, right? You have the data, so we know the data about how big the ship is, how many people are on it, but it's how you actually present that, how you get people to engage with it. So in terms of data, information, and intelligence, what does that tell us? What's the difference here? What's the difference between these three? How would anyone define now? What's the difference between data and information for a start? How would you define that? What separates data and information? Or do you think it's one and the same thing? And then, of course, on top of that, we also have intelligence, which I would regard to be a stage further on than that. So if you think about even just that examples that we had there, there's underlying data. There's the numbers of people. There's the crimes that were committed, right? There's the sizes of the ship. That's the data. The information is how we're now starting to communicate that to people. All right, so we communicate the crimes as a single field of view table. We communicate the crimes knowing that people will look at the top of a list and at the bottom of the list. Yes, so Thomas says the data is the numbers. Jen talks about the data is the raw stuff. Absolutely. Yeah, it's there. It's kind of unformed. Right? It's the ingredients. The information is about how we actually absorb that. Then, how do we present it? How do we put it into context for people? So, what's the intelligence? Oh, that's a nice one. Greg's just put a comment on there that says intelligence equals information times analysis. Very good. To me, intelligence is then beyond information. Intelligence is what we're then able to do with the information. So the intelligence, the jury then had the intelligence to form opinions about the witnesses. All right, they were able to make decisions, and I think that's what's really important then, is for most of us, in terms of what we are doing and what we are producing data and information for, we're using it for people to make decisions. Okay, and therefore intelligence is really important. The intelligence then for us to be able to decide that slavery needs to be abolished. Verified information. So intelligence is verified information. Well, we'll come to that. I think in a moment when we look at different aspects of how we kind of health check our data. Okay, so I want to make that distinctions now. One of the things that we have, as I said, I promised you a couple of things here, 2 or 3 things. One was some examples, 2 was some principles, and the third thing was a little bit of a framework to think about things. We use a framework to think about how data works, how information works, and how intelligence works. And we have this little kind of framework here, which at the top, first of all, gets you to assess the quality of the data that you have, and I'll explore some of that in just a moment. And then down the bottom, we assess actually how well do we deliver that information. And again, we've got a bunch of criteria around that that I'll take you through. And then across horizontally here, we have really it's about the intelligence. So it's about stepping back from the data and stepping back from technology and saying, what is it that we need to know? What are the decisions that we need to make? And then that can drive us towards looking at, well, what's the information that we need? What's the data that we need in order to fulfill that? And possibly, is there intelligence or information that we can get that we didn't know we actually had? Do we get insights that we didn't know we actually had? Alison makes a point as well in the comments. It's that it's not a two-way street. Data is extracted from information, and we use the data to have information. We can extract data from information. I'll have to think about that one. I think we certainly extract decisions from the information. So we've got a bit of a framework here, and I wanted to touch on some of this as we go through. But I think this is very much about, at the end of the day, we're all gathering data, we're all providing information in order for people to make decisions. And how do we make decisions? Generally, we make decisions by a combination of judgment and intelligence. Right. So judgment to me is our own experience. So what have we experienced ourselves? What works? What doesn't seem to work for us? So a little bit subjective. Things that we learn, things that we share, things that we do, and also rules. So we make judgments based upon specific rules that says, well, we can't do this, we must do this, whatever it may be. But we make the best decisions then when that judgment is supported with intelligence. That will help us with our decision making, and that intelligence comes from having information that we can easily consume and having data that we can rely upon. So to me, there's a flow there in which you come to make the decisions that you make, and the best decisions, I think, are made through the combination of that. And a lot of that intelligence these days can come from prediction. And I'll talk about that at the very end. What we do see, though, is that and you probably see this in your own organizations, but some people will just simply avoid decisions. I once sat outside a meeting for someone to emerge and say, we've decided not to decide. Okay, is that a decision or not? But some people will avoid decisions, or they'll make just default decisions because the stuff on the left-hand side here, this data, this information intelligence, either isn't there, it's not reliable, or it just seems too hard to go and get. So we'll just keep making the same decisions that we've always made before. We'll keep doing the same things. So having the right data, having it presented properly in a way that we can engage with so that we can get intelligence from that, will lead to better decisions, and we'll round things off at the end with that. So let's look at data quality. So we're all gathering ever more data now, right? And it's becomes very easy to get it. And for those of you who are using our COMET environment, you'll be familiar with a lot of the data, obviously, that gets gathered within an incident investigation, for example. So this is one of our dashboards that presents information about the underlying data that's in the incidents which have been investigated. They may have been safety incidents, they may have been quality incidents, etc. So we're gathering lots of data. We're gathering temporal data about dates and times. We're gathering geospatial data about locations. We're gathering information about types of incidents, categories of incidents, getting into more detail. The analysis allows us to get root causes. Whoops. So on the left-hand side there, we've got, our top 10 root causes. So we're gathering lots and lots of data here. The question is it any good? All right, so before we even get into analysis and look at dashboards, is the data any good? And you need to be asking yourselves that, and ideally you need to be having a regular review about just what is the quality of your data. And we use these criteria here, or characteristics, I should say, as a means of trying to understand whether any data set or any data world is actually valid or not. And I'll mention some of these and show you one or two examples of what we mean that can help to do this. But up at the kind of 1 o'clock position there, we'll start out about consistent. So is your data consistent? All right. So is it being gathered in the same way? Are things being interpreted the same way? Do you have the same definitions around things, so that you don't end up with someone putting in something which they think they interpret as being totally different from someone else? And having good, strong procedures around that is probably the best solution to do that. And many of our COMET customers have their own incident investigation standard, which sets the rules around how we do this and what we do, and how we fill in fields and in databases and forms and so on, and makes definitions about what we do in terms of data gathering. And I think that's important. And if you're not doing something like that at the moment, then I would encourage you to do it. And if you are doing it, then there's a point at which you should probably be double checking, are we actually gathering it in the same way that we're supposed to be said we were gathering, the difference again between work done and work as imagined. So we want to look and see, are we actually gathering data that is consistent? We want to see if the data is complete. Do we have a lot of gaps in there? Is there things missing? And again, to some degree, we do that within the COMET tool. You're able to get a view on some aspects of gaps. There's a dashboard within our COMET environment which looks at the different stages of the process and sets a number of tests to see how complete and how good a quality is some of the data that's actually in there. So, for example, it will look to see if we've got, a barrier test. It'll look to see how many investigations have done a barrier analysis. It will look at the number of actions that are created relative to root causes and decide. And there's rules built in here that says, if you don't have a certain ratio or you don't have a certain amount, then it's probably a bit incomplete. And it's color coded. So each of the little tests here is green if it's doing very well. It's orange if it's just meeting the criteria, and it's gray if it's lacking. So we can get drawn into then go and decide, okay, my COMET factor evidence test down the middle of the left-hand side there is very gray, which means that I've got a lot of missing data there. It's incomplete, so I should probably be going back and trying to improve the way in which that data is gathered. So think about looking at ways in which you can determine if the data is really complete or not. The degree of depth to the data, so similar kind of things to what we looked at there. It's all very well to have just something in, but is there enough depth within that? So if you're asking people to provide a narrative description or something, is it more than just 3 words? We actually turned back a multinational client a couple of years ago to do a big data project, basically because they just did not have the degree of depth to their data. It would have been a pointless exercise for everyone. So they went back to re-look at how they were gathering data. Is the data you're gathering actually valuable? Is there actually use in the points that you're gathering? As I say, we can gather so much now, and some people gather everything. I had a conversation just last week with a client who was complaining the fact that they have a huge turnover of staff, and everyone whoever wanted some data points gathered, it was always gathered, and then they would leave and no one would want to use that data anymore, but it's still gathered and it's just become very, very burgeoning. So yeah, so sometimes you need to have a bit of a thin out and go, are we actually gathering useful data here? The next one we have which is actually quite difficult to assess, is about credibility of the data. How reflective is it of reality? And I don't know what any of you do to try and verify that, but that can be very difficult, other than spot checks and dip sampling to see whether what people are actually providing is true and correct or not. But clearly that's an aspect which can thoroughly affect any decision making further down the line. And the culture behind how we gather data is very, very important as well. And you'll notice that most of the things around this ring actually have nothing really to do with software systems. Probably the last one, the capture, does, but the rest of them are actually all about our cultures and our behaviors and our methods, and how we support data gathering. We've had reports of some people being reluctant to submit data because they're required to go to a space in which it's obvious that they are completing, for example, an observation report. It can't be sort of done in private, and they don't want to be seen to be doing that. So you need to think as well about the whole kind of culture that we have about how we're reporting. And again, within our COMET tool, and it's a different way of looking at things as well. But we also have in there a set of rules around different types of behaviours about how people are doing investigations, and we sort of tongue in cheek. Have given different kind of characters within that, names. So, for example, on the right-hand side here, we have infrequent Ingrid, and what the system is able to do is look at Ingrid's investigations, and if she's someone who infrequently is using the system, is infrequently doing investigations, there may be a chance that she might have learning fade. So we just want to flag that up and actually take a look to see if when we look at the quality graphs, might this individual benefit from having some sort of improvement, in order to make sure that they are completely up to speed with how to go about gathering the data and using the system. So you can, there's different ways in which, as I say, in which you can provide this, and we're starting to get into information here now, but this is about ways of qualifying the data that we've got, and looking at different behavioral characteristics. All right, so we can have on the other end of the extreme there cursory Colin, who seems to go through it all, but very quite brief about everything, and sort of, is that enough in terms of depth that's going on? So you could think about data gathering characters in terms of what you have. So the first of my principles, I said, I will also leave you with 10 principles for data and information use, and the first one of these is this: you must not fool yourself, because you're the easiest person to fool. So yeah, just don't. You can't trust absolutely everything that's in there. It's going to be rubbish in, rubbish out. So whatever you can do to make sure that the data gathered is of the best possible quality that it can possibly be, then the better decisions that we can make out the other end. So, okay, we gather the data, we gather it to the best of our abilities, and then people want to use it, people want to access it, people want to see it. So again, a bunch of criteria here and the characteristics that we look for, in terms of deciding whether the way in which our data is used and turned into information and analyzed and delivered is of real value to us. So a bunch of characteristics here again, some of them a little bit based around the ability to use tools, but again, a lot of it is around behaviors and stuff as well. So let me just pick up on one or two of these, and I'll show you some examples. Is the information delivery configurable? So we're talking now about how people consume the data. So rather than just giving them the data, how are we going to get them to actually consume this? And I'll share with you an example of something we've done recently, which I think is quite a good example of this. So this is looking at safety information across a range of organizations, and the information is delivered here. So there's lots and lots. There's hundreds of data points gathered from each individual organization, on a regular basis. And rather than providing enormous amounts of graphs and charts to go and look at, we've deployed a number of information design approaches here. One is about configurability. And what we've got here with this view is that the organization said of all the things that we need, there's probably about 6 things that we need to look at. We need to look at the frequency of incidents, the severity of them, the locations of them, what are people doing when they are affected by them, what bits of the body does it affect, and what time of day. So they said that's probably about 6 main things that we really want to look at. There's a bunch of other things as well, but that's the main ones. So let's put all that together, and then let's allow people to configure that the way that they actually want it. So they can configure whether it's based by head count or number of hours work. They can configure it, in a variety of ways, whether they want to look at incidents, whether they want to look at near misses. They can configure it to timescales. So a real mantra for us in terms of any information delivery, in fact, of any type of user interface system, is configuration, not customization. Right? As soon as you go into customization of information delivery, you will rapidly end up with 10, 20, 30, 100 different versions of something, and that's just unsustainable. Whereas the tools these days are allowing us that we can go in, we can configure data, we can save our configuration, and that's fine. We can just bring it back up again whenever we come back to it. Someone else wants a different configuration, that's fine. So allow people to configure the data that they particularly want. And there's my principle number 2. So for any of you who are working in this generation of outputs of information, dashboards or whatever, then have that as a real strong commitment there. Do what you can to let the users configure what they want. Yes, by all means, preempt the most obvious things that they do want to see and make it easy for them to see it. But at the same time, let them go and configure and let them go and look for whatever it is that they particularly want to look for. And so a number of other things within here, obviously making it accessible so that the tools are easily accessible. If you start using obscure tools to go and display your data in difficult places to get to that require expensive subscriptions, then people are not going to be able to access this. A lot of you these days are probably using things like Power BI and stuff like that because it's much more accessible and becoming ubiquitous. So think about how easy is it for people to actually access the information that they need to. How well is it maintained? So often stuff will go out of date, stuff won't be changed, and we lose the value that's in there. Usability. So thinking about people being able to access this and how usable is it to work with the information delivery that you've got. And again, I'll going back to a couple of examples, but one of the things that we have in this is about the idea of kind of simple designs. So you can put a lot of information into a single screen so long as you make the design of it relatively simple and relatively intuitive. And there's a whole bunch of design principles around being able to do that. But don't be afraid to make some views quite intense, so long as the overall design is actually quite simple. Quite simple and clear. And consistency again is important, because if there's a standard way of showing something and people get used to a standard way of seeing it, you can up the intensity of what's in there. And one of my long-standing examples of that is in the UK. I suppose it's relevant this year because we have the Cheltenham Gold Cup in terms of horse racing. But if any of you have ever looked at horse racing race form cards, they are packed full of information and data. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that people who back horse racing are maybe just not uh, we might regard as the most intelligent in the world, because obviously that would be a bit too much to say, but they can easily absorb this information, dense information, because it's in a format that is clear, that is understood by them, and it's consistent. So there's lots and lots of data in racing form cards that I don't understand because I'm not familiar with it, but it is particularly dense. So don't be afraid in upping the intensity of the data that you've got, so long as people have a standard way of thinking about it. And one of the other principles that we're really strong on when it comes to presenting information, and this goes right back to my first example as well about the court case of the mafia mobster, fit it into a single field of view. We're probably all like that, aren't we? The moment we have to start turning pages and flicking through stuff, we get fed up. Give it to me in one field of view, one page. Maybe a big page, maybe quite intense, right? But it's there. It's right in front of me. I can now start to engage with that. And that's one long-standing principle that should apply to anything that you think about delivering. And how we arrange data as well influences how we see it. So again, we saw that in my two left field examples to begin with. If you look in likes of the COMET tool, then we are applying that principle here about how we arrange it influences how you see it. One thing that that many COMET customers struggled with before we put this in was about trying to understand what root causes occurred together. Right, so root causes to an incident never normally are single isolated root causes. There's always more than one. And what was always bugging people was, okay, well, which ones are actually occurring together then? Are they clustering? So what we did is the data's in there. So again, we created an information view that said, right, well, we're going to plot how often each root cause, which is a little identifier number here, occurs with any other root cause. And because there's 62 root causes in there, this is a rather large matrix to work with if you try to do this in a spreadsheet and to look through. So what we did is just simply, right, we'll change the color of the square of the intersection of these two to be a little bit darker the more and more that these root causes occur together. And you're immediately drawn to this. So I'm immediately drawn to the fact that C6 and OE1 up on the left-hand side here is much darker colored. These two root causes must be occurring together quite a lot. Right, so I'm drawn to that. So this is all about, as I say, how you arrange that data will influence what people see in it and how quickly they can see what they want. So thinking about different ways in which to present information. And also don't limit thinking to 2 dimensions. We work in 2-dimensional spaces here in terms of screens and pieces of paper, but there's a number of different ways in which you can look at putting more dimensions together. So that this is a view on severity of incidents which have been reported. So on the right hand side, there's a graph that has a horizontal axis of ever increasing severity, and up the way is the number of is a severity rate. So we immediately get a 2-dimensional view, but the actual size of the intersection, the bubble at that point, relates to the number of incidents at that particular rate. So you can then, again, your eye is drawn to what is bigger. You can make comparisons between the two. And on the right-hand side, we've got a temporal aspect to this because this is showing the severity of incidents that occurred and the potential for them to have been worse. So we've got a temporal aspect on that. So we're pulling in more dimensions here. And for anyone who really wants to get some real inspiration about working with multiple dimensions in a 2-dimensional space, and some of you may be familiar with this organization called Gapminder. Gapminder's been around for a number of years, producing a lot of analysis around international data. So this is looking here at CO2 emissions against GDP per capita. And again, because I'm in a 2-dimensional world here, I can't show this very well, but they animate the process. So you can slide something like this to various different years, and you can see how, for example, China goes from, having sort of low GDP, low CO2 emissions and becomes bigger and moves up the scale and so on. So if anyone ever has a free moment and you want to enjoy yourselves, then go to gapminder.org, and there's some great tools on that shows you what's possible in terms of working with multiple dimensions. And My last principle is about using the right graph for the job. All right, we've grown up, a lot of us, with things like Microsoft Excel and stuff like that, which just automatically plunks in the first graph that it thinks should go in there. There's no, in fact, there's no real thought to it. Whereas what you really need to do is choose the things that are most important for getting over the point that you want to make. So, for example, if you want to get over the point about which parts of the body are being most affected by certain activities, then just show a body. All right, don't start drawing bar charts and stuff like that. Just show a body. So I'm immediately drawn to this, and that the darker parts are the ones that are most affected by my activities. All right, so it looks like it's fingers and back then in this case. Don't need to think any further. It's there. It's presented straight in front of me. And similarly, in the COMET tool, we have an analysis of the time at which incident happened. So let's just have a 24-hour clock, and let's see where the hands are when most incidents occur. So on the left-hand side there, in this example, you can see spikes at around 2 in the afternoon and somewhere around 10 in the morning. And on the right is a spike of incidents which involved human errors, and you can see again there's this spike around 2 in the afternoon. And I think in this case this was predominantly because of shift changes. All right, so using a time plot to actually see what's going on. So choosing the right graph is really important. And color, someone mentioned that, I think, to begin with as well, about the fact that some of the examples I gave were black and white. Sometimes people create things which are basically explosions in paint factories. So avoid that. Use color with a purpose. You can use color in different ways. You can use color for grouping. So things that belong to the same group there in the top left-hand corner, such as root causes, are of the same color. All right, and that color is fed through the whole system. Then it's consistent. You could use it for comparison. So you can compare against an average, the green line, and you compare it against someone else, your blue lines. All right, so we can use color to highlight different comparisons, or you can use color to create focus, to draw people to something. All right, so the example we've got here is again from the COMET environment. It's the number of root causes that are chosen by an investigator. What we're looking for there is whether any investigator is over choosing particular root causes. And again, we're drawn to the red. We're drawn, as it goes green, that's good, right? Red, that's a danger area. We've got a couple of investigators there that we're drawn to, that we need to go in and just understand why it is that they seem to keep choosing OE1 and keep choosing OE3 as root causes. So again, information, and we're getting now into decision making. We're getting into that. All right, and yeah, and not overpopulating things with color. So things that are in the background, make them gray, make them blend into the background so that they're not obvious, they don't stand out. And then use the color to draw people's attention to what you want to draw people's attention to. Now, it may seem obvious, but as I say, just have a look around some of the things that are in your own organization in terms of how information is presented, and just see how well is color really used. So, okay, so that's some of the principles around information design. Basically, there's many more, but keeping some of those principles in mind when you're wanting people to consume the data that you have for them is important. And we're consuming this information because why? We're consuming it because we ultimately want to make decisions. We want to get intelligence to allow us to either predict something or to make decisions about something. Right. And another one of our principles here is, if you're going to go and design some system for gathering data and presenting information, by all means do that. But first of all, go and actually understand, I say in English, whatever your local language is, but say it in plain language first before you try to say it in data. So find out, what is it that people want to make decisions on? What is it that they want answers to? And then go and look at, well, how do we get that answers from the data? Okay, so for example, the dashboards that appear in the COMET tool are pretty much designed around the fact of what people wanted to know. All right, and they can be obvious things like just tell us when investigations were done. They can be much more involved things and much more focused and specific. For example, tell us which preventive actions are always duplicated. All right, so go and consult with people to find out what they really want, and that's our kind of horizontal access through this framework that I introduced at the beginning. So yes, we've looked at the data quality, we've looked at the information, but actually what is the needs of all of this? All right. And sitting down with people to say, well, what is it that you actually want to know? What is it that you want to decide? What's your priorities here? What do you need to get intelligence on? And then you can start to look at, well, do we have the data to do that? Do we have it enough of it? Do we have it of the right quality? And you can also then sit down and say, well, what's the best way of delivering that, right? Rather than just deliver it because that's what Power BI or Excel tells us to or whatever. Let's think about what's the best way that we can deliver that to the people who need to make decisions. And out the other end of this diagram on the right-hand side, of course, is the fact that you maybe are gathering data and you maybe are presenting information in a certain way, and you don't quite realize that there are some opportunities here to find things out that you never knew that you could. So doing a bit of an audit around this can be really useful as well, as to take a look at what you've got and thinking, well, could we use this in some way to tell us something more about what we've got? And we're getting into the realms there then about prediction and about where we're at now, I suppose, as a world in terms of artificial intelligence to a degree, where we're looking at our data and trying to perhaps extract things from it which are not always guaranteed to be 100% accurate. All right, but they could be better than actually not knowing at all. So if you think about some of the work now that's going on, certainly we've been doing this to, to aggregate up data from all sorts of different sources, say from a safety point of view, and to try to be able to look for trends within that, to try and look for insights that may not have been seen obviously before, then it's better to have an inkling that something may not be right rather than just wait until we're 100% certain that there's an issue in there. So I think a lot of this artificial intelligence is we're going to have to, as an organization and as individuals, be more comfortable in dealing with uncertainty, right? So that we're not sitting waiting for a dashboard to show a graph that says I'm 100% certain that this value is 100, but we want to be comfortable in working with a system that's going to tell us we're sort of 75% thinking that you might have a problem with X. All right. So if we were struggling before to not make decisions because we didn't have all the information in place, I think the decision makers of the future are going to have to be in a position where they're going to be quite happy to work with uncertainty. We've been playing around with this, and if I can swap the screen here, I'll maybe get my glamorous assistant Beth to help me with this, to put the little video I have there center stage. Is that possible? To change my what's on screen here? Are we? I can do that. Well, video is not for playing, I don't think. But we have one of the things that we have been doing. Some of you may be aware of it who have been working with us in some of these areas. But we are starting to use machine learning models to ingest data from wide sources, from incident investigations, near miss reports, observations, things like that within audits within a safety environment. I'm starting to learn from that, use the machine learning models to look for topics and look for trends and what's going on. And we've got a bit of a conversational interface starting to go within that now, which is allowing us to be able to ask questions. So, for example, we can actually ask it things like, I'm going to change out a valve soon. Um, is it possible to know what sort of hazards I should be looking for? And what it's going to do with that is it's going to look back through what it's learnt about valve replacements and safety issues and incidents and risk from the past, and start to pull some of that together from quite disparate sources. So not just relying on a fully formed and structured database, but being able to look at unstructured data and pull that out. So we're heading in that direction as well now, and that ultimately, and I think any of the things that we've talked about in terms of delivering data and delivering information, delivering intelligence, is about trying to make better decisions around where you intervene, where you spend your money, what resources you're going to apply, what you're going to do to stop something happening. And ultimately as well, can you close the loop and start to actually go back around that loop again and go back to get better data quality. So there we go then. A kind of a bit of framework, a few examples of things, hopefully some food for thought as well, and maybe sort of fire you on to look at how you can make improvements within your own particular area. A bunch of principles around how you design information for people to consume. One of my other principles as well is about there's no point in disappointing your audience in greater detail. So I hope I haven't done that for you here. We've taken a fairly high level view through a number of things with some examples, but I'll leave the last few minutes open for any kind of questions or points that anyone wants to make around what we've been looking at here, even from your own experiences, or even if you want to completely disagree with anything that I've said. So if there's any comments, thank you, Thomas, for your comment. Yeah. Anyone want to share anything in terms of their own experiences, good or bad, in terms of trying to get data that's reliable or trying to present it in a way that has worked well or has fallen completely flat on its face? I was going to pick up a previous comment about that's right. Alison said about can information come back and give you data, and I think that's where I was going to close the loop on this at the end here. Is that I think that with things like machine learning models on data, then I think there is the possibility to close that loop back again. That you may be able to generate new data from the information that's there by using some sort of intelligence. But I think we're probably getting into semantics then, if that's the case. Okay. Well, in that case, as I say, I'd encourage you to think about how you are presenting what you're doing. I'm going to leave my oops, if I can spell it right. That would be bad information. I'm going to leave my email address in the chat box. So if anyone wants to contact me directly and I'd follow up on any of these points, and I'd be delighted to have a conversation. As I say, although engineering and technical by background, I've always had a passion to make sure that information is available with as much clarity as possible. Yeah, Beth, I'm sure will make the session available via a link, I believe. You'll get a link to that. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jen. Yeah. Okay, all right then. Well, thank you all very much for attending and taking some time out of your day. As I say, feel free to get in touch with any of us on the back of this if you wish, and hopefully see you again in another session sometime. Thank you, Maria. Okay.